Recent days have brought with them an unusual heaviness in the atmosphere, a burden that doesn't match the weather outside or any obvious external factors, but rather an emotional climate that has settled into your daily experience. You've likely noticed a sudden restlessness taking hold, an internal alarm system triggering without any clear reason as you move through your ordinary activities. Your rational mind, always searching for concrete evidence and tangible explanations, tries to dismiss this feeling by insisting that everything remains unchanged, that nothing has visibly shifted, and that there's no justification for concern. Yet deep within, in that space where your truest instincts reside, you recognize with absolute certainty that something essential has shifted in the invisible framework of this bond. This isn't a product of fear or fantasy, but rather your inherent ability to sense the energetic frequencies of someone with whom you share a profound link. When two souls become intertwined by fate, physical silence cannot erase the energetic conversation, and what you're experiencing now is the reverberation of a choice made from afar. If your instincts are speaking to you, write "0" in the comments. This message hasn't appeared in your life randomly, but through resonance. The universe doesn't miscalculate, and doesn't send signals to those unprepared to interpret them. If these words are resonating with you at this precise moment, it's because there's an exact alignment between your internal state and the truth that's about to emerge. Certain cycles must complete themselves so that new ones can begin, and this unease that won't release you, these sudden awakenings in the early morning hours, or this hollow feeling in your chest, are confirmations that the current state has been shattered. Someone at the opposite end of this invisible thread has reached a turning point. This isn't about a fleeting whim or a surface-level mood shift. This is about an internal collapse that developed gradually, drop by drop, until the vessel overflowed. It's crucial to understand that what's happening isn't a personal attack or a conscious act of lovelessness, even though the loneliness it creates might suggest otherwise. What has occurred is that this person has reached their limit of human and spiritual endurance. We're often taught to value perseverance, to remain, to fight, but rarely do we discuss the price of maintaining a situation that no longer resonates with the truth of one's being. This person has carried an invisible burden, an accumulation of unspoken words, unmet expectations, and most significantly, a progressive disconnection from their own essence. The exhaustion being referenced here isn't the kind that can be remedied with a weekend of sleep or a vacation. This is soul weariness, an existential depletion born from attempting to force a reality that no longer fits, or from giving more energy than one possessed. For a considerable time, everything might have appeared normal on the surface. Interactions continued, routines remained intact, and smiles, though dimmer, still appeared. But beneath this layer of normalcy, a silent battle was being fought, a conflict between the desire to maintain the connection and the urgent need to survive emotionally. The decision to create distance, to go silent, or to withdraw, wasn't made yesterday or today. It was a conclusion reached after countless sleepless nights, after numerous internal debates between heart and mind. It was a quiet decision, made in the solitude of one's own consciousness, to protect what little remained of energetic integrity. The intuition you're experiencing is the alarm system recognizing this withdrawal. Even though there hasn't been a final conversation or detailed explanation, energy doesn't lie. You perceive the absence even before the physical goodbye becomes fully concrete. You notice the change in the gaze, the coldness in words, or the delay in responses. This isn't indifference, it's self-preservation. This person has retreated inward because the external world and the demands of this connection in its current form had become unbearable. It's essential to validate what you're feeling. You're not inventing anything. This anguish is confirmation that the bond is real, so real that your emotional system registers the other person's movements as if they were your own. The universe, in its infinite wisdom, allows these pauses to occur not as punishment, but as reorganization. Sometimes love alone isn't enough if the structure supporting it is unbalanced. This person hasn't moved away because the love has necessarily disappeared, but because the dynamic, as it existed, was consuming their vital reserves. It's like attempting to run a marathon with an open wound. There comes a moment when the body stops, not because it doesn't want to reach the finish line, but because it must heal in order to continue. The decision made is essentially a cry for help from the soul, requesting space to breathe, to rediscover itself, and to evaluate whether moving forward is possible without losing oneself. The uncertainty is painful, and silence can be the most deafening noise that exists. But there's a hidden truth in this scenario that must be revealed to find some peace. This isn't about a definitive ending carved in stone, but rather an inevitable, energetic consequence. Life is demanding a transformation. Your intuition brought you here to confirm that yes, something has changed, something has broken, but not to abandon you to despair, rather to offer you a higher perspective on events. This person couldn't continue anymore, and their withdrawal is the symptom of something far deeper than simple lack of interest. It's the result of an exhausting performance, of maintaining a facade that could no longer breathe. However, to understand why this detachment was inevitable and necessary at this precise time, we must look into a place where the light of consciousness rarely reaches, into the depths of the psyche and the masks we wear to be loved. To grasp the magnitude of what's happening, we must confront one of the most revealing concepts from depth psychology, an idea that Carl Jung explored extensively, and which explains with surgical precision this person's behavior. At this moment, all human beings without exception construct an interface to interact with the world, a sort of social mask, created to make a good impression, to be accepted, to meet others' expectations, and to protect against rejection. This structure is called the persona, a term derived from the masks that actors in ancient times wore to amplify their voices and define their roles and performances. This special person, the one your heart is asking about, has worn a very heavy mask for far too long, and the weight of this performance has finally caused a breakdown. Imagine for a moment the titanic effort required to maintain an image of strength while feeling fragility inside. Imagine the wear of always appearing available, always pleasant, or perhaps always indifferent and under control, when inside there are unprocessed emotions. This person has constructed a persona, a mask to relate to you and to the world. Perhaps it was the mask of someone who can do everything, or someone who needs no one, or someone who pleases everyone. Initially, the mask worked. It was useful. It allowed the relationship to flow and gave a false sense of security. But every mask has a cost. The problem with the persona is that over time, if worn without interruption, it begins to suffocate the authentic self underneath. What started as a strategy becomes a prison. This person was presenting a version of themselves that wasn't completely honest, not because they wanted to deceive, but because they didn't know how to be vulnerable without risking rejection. And you, without intending to, may have responded more to the mask than to the person behind it. This created an impossible dynamic. The more this person tried to be what they believed you expected, the further they drifted from their true self. And the more they drifted, the more unbearable the act became. Jung warned that if the persona becomes too rigid, if someone identifies completely with their social mask, the repressed self begins to rebel. What psychology calls the shadow, everything this person rejected, denied, or suppressed to maintain the acceptable image, begins to accumulate in the unconscious, like pressure in a sealed container. Eventually, that pressure seeks an escape valve, and the most common escape valve is precisely this: the sudden rupture of the connection, the inexplicable withdrawal, the silence that leaves the other person bewildered. What you're witnessing isn't abandonment. It's an identity crisis disguised as relational distance. This person isn't running from you. They're running from the version of themselves they can no longer sustain. And the tragedy is that they don't know how to explain this because they haven't consciously understood it themselves. In their perception, they only feel an overwhelming need to escape, to breathe, to stop performing. But they can't articulate it without sounding cruel or incomprehensible. So they choose silence, which is the only language their exhausted system can manage at this moment. Now let's address the part that might sound esoteric or unbelievable if you haven't experienced it, but which thousands of people who have gone through this process can confirm with chilling accuracy. When a bond reaches this level of depth, when two people have shared genuine intimacy, not just physical but emotional and spiritual, an energetic channel is established. This isn't metaphor or poetry. It's an observable phenomenon that various spiritual traditions have documented for millennia, and which quantum physics is beginning to validate with terms like non-local entanglement. This energetic channel doesn't disappear when one of the two decides to withdraw physically or mentally. In fact, paradoxically, it intensifies. When this person attempts to block you out of their conscious mind, when they try to forget you, distract themselves, or convince themselves they've moved on, all that suppressed energy doesn't evaporate. It travels through the invisible thread directly to you. This is why during the most unexpected moments, when you're engaged in something completely different, a wave of inexplicable sadness washes over you, or sudden anxiety grips your chest, or a feeling of longing so intense appears that it seems to have no origin in your current reality. You become the receiver of everything this person doesn't dare to feel consciously. This explains why suddenly, during a moment of calm, you're overtaken by profound and devastating sadness, anxiety that arrives without warning and has no relation to what you're doing at that moment. It's not your sadness, it's this person's. You feel the grief that the other party denies. You process the emotions that the other blocks. It's an involuntary emotional transfusion. The invisible thread acts as a communicating vessel. When one of the two containers attempts to empty itself artificially, the other fills up to compensate for the system's balance. This is why the more this person tries to forget you or distract themselves, the more intensely you feel their energetic presence invading your vital space. The symptoms of this somatic telepathy are very specific, and you'll surely recognize several. One of the most common is sleep interruption, particularly between 3 and 4 in the morning. In many spiritual and mystical traditions, it's known that during these hours, the veil between the conscious and unconscious is thinnest. If you wake up suddenly unable to sleep, with a sensation of alertness or anxiety in your chest, it's very likely that this is precisely the moment when this person's psychic defenses lower because they're sleeping. When they fall asleep, their ego rests, resistance vanishes, and their soul rushes to seek yours. This sudden awakening is the impact of their energy arriving to you when there are no rational barriers to prevent it. If you experience sudden awakenings, write "awake" in the comments. This isn't simple insomnia, it's an energetic visit. Another common symptom is the sensation of pressure on the chest, as if air is lacking, or as if there's a physical weight on the heart. Sometimes it manifests as accelerated palpitations without any physical exertion. This energetic center, the heart, is the anchor point of the connection. When this person thinks intensely about you or experiences sharp remorse they don't express in words, your heart center reacts. It's as if someone is pulling the invisible thread from the other end. It's also possible that you've perceived familiar scents, this person's fragrance or a characteristic aroma, that recalls them in places where it's physically impossible for them to be. Smell is directly connected to the limbic system, the emotional brain. And these olfactory hallucinations are actually the way your intuition translates the proximity of their vibration. This connection manifests overwhelmingly also in the dream world. Dreams stop being simple processing of the day's information and become true encounters on the astral plane. You may have had dreams that seem more alive than reality itself. Dreams in which communication is fluid, in which there's no resentment, in which this person speaks to you with an honesty they can't achieve in the waking state. In those dreams, they tell you what they keep silent while awake. They embrace you or look at you with the love they try to hide. Jung suggested that dreams are the door to the soul's truth. If you dream continuously about this person, it's not only because you miss them, but because there's an agreed-upon meeting on that plane. There, free from masks and fear, souls continue the relationship that egos have paused on Earth. Waking from those dreams usually leaves a bittersweet sensation, a mixture of peace from the reunion and pain from returning to the physical reality of silence. You might even feel sudden temperature changes, chills along the spine, or a sudden sensation of warmth in the hands or on the face. These are manifestations of energy moving through the thread. Sometimes you might be thinking about something else, and out of nowhere, their name bursts into your mind with the force of a shout, or you hear a song significant to both of you at the most improbable moment. All of this is confirmation that the abandonment is only a fiction of the material plane. On an energetic level, you've never been as united as you are now. The paradox is cruel, but real. Physical distance has intensified spiritual proximity, because the energy of the bond cannot be consumed in daily contact, in mundane words, or in routine. All this force accumulates and travels through the invisible channel, creating this almost supernatural phenomenology. It's fundamental to learn to distinguish what is yours from what belongs to the other, so as not to go mad in this process. When you feel an overwhelming emotion that doesn't fit your immediate context, stop and ask yourself internally, is this mine or is this a visit? Most of the time you'll discover it's someone else's burden you're carrying, through an unconscious loyalty to the connection. Understanding this returns power to you. You stop being a victim of your emotional swings and become an observer of the connection. You know that this person hasn't forgotten you, that their silence is a white lie they tell themselves, because if they had truly forgotten you, you wouldn't feel this energetic tumult in your body. True indifference feels like emptiness, like peace, like nothing. What you feel is turbulence, and turbulence is a sign of life, of conflict, and of latent presence. These signals are intense, sometimes exhausting, but they're irrefutable proof that the soul contract is still valid. The universe doesn't waste energy maintaining channels that no longer serve a purpose. If the channel is open and transmitting with such force, it's because the story isn't finished. It has only changed stages. It's moved from the visible scene where the actors have withdrawn to the invisible stage, where the show continues with greater dramatic intensity. But these signals can be confusing and generate fear if they're not validated. Before delving more deeply into the destiny of this connection and the higher meaning of this pain, it's important to pause and observe the raw reality of what's being felt, to confirm that you're not on a solitary journey of imagination, but in a shared experience of resonance. It's natural that hearing all this raises a rational doubt in the mind. It's easy to think that perhaps everything is the product of desire, that the mind invents signals to console itself in the face of absence. This is why it's time to stop and look around, using this space not only as a place of listening, but as a collective mirror. When you begin to recognize that this phenomenon doesn't exist only within you, but reflects in countless other hearts, the pain loses its isolating character. You understand that you're part of a larger process, of a soul movement that crosses people all over the world, when a connection of this depth enters a phase of transformation. This awareness doesn't bring immediate relief, but it brings clarity, and clarity is the first form of peace. Because once truth is spoken or acknowledged, energy begins to reorganize itself. What today appears as a labyrinth of doubts will become tomorrow a traced path. And even though you can't yet see the exit, every breath, every thought, and every conscious decision brings you closer to a point where everything will make sense. Until then, only one thing remains: to trust the process that is larger than both of you and that guides you visibly or invisibly, step by step, toward the place where you need to be. If you trust your journey, write "trust" in the comments.